We're recording. All right, here we are with Dr. Aaron Skalicki and Eric Paredes. Did I say that right?
Yeah, you did.
All right, fantastic. I couldn't be more excited today because I want to learn about a completely new thing to me called thru-hiking. Now, Aaron did it for the first time last summer. Eric has done it several times, and so he knows about it. I saw a movie with Reese Witherspoon on the PCT, Pacific Crest Trail, and that's about all I know. And so, I think in these days when we're looking at what else can we do, what can we get out there and enjoy, be out in nature and just have a little bit of an adventure that goes along with it. So if we could talk about, what is thru-hiking? Like, what is this overall concept? Oops, Eric, you're muted.
And I've been doing Zoom calls for about 3 months, and you'd think I'd have that down. But anyway, the basic premise of a thru hike is a point-to-point hike, right? So a beginning and an end on a trail, similar to the one you just described, the Pacific Crest Trail. And all these trails vary in length. It could be anywhere from a couple hundred miles to several thousand miles. And in duration, it could be anywhere from a couple of days, a couple of weeks to several months. The Pacific Crest Trail is, I think for most people, it takes anywhere from 6 to 8 months. So it is a significant commitment. This isn't just, going out camping overnight. This requires some advanced planning and certainly some risk or desire for risk, and a desire to sort of face the unknown, right? And prepare as best as possible for that, but also sort of put yourself out there and be ready to adapt and move as necessary.
And when you say risk, I mean, there's risk like base jumping. That's a lot of risk. When there's risk like bears, like when you say risks, what are we talking about?
Well, it depends on how you rate base jumping and the potential, outcome of that to a bear. So I would argue, in my scale, I tend to be a little bit scared of heights. So I would put, base jumping way out there. The ability to sort of outrun a bear, probably somewhere in the middle, right? Yeah. But in my scale, if I take out that sort of edge of the spectrum there with the base jumping, getting pursued by a bear is probably about as risky as it gets, right?
Yeah, for sure.
The other ones, though, I mean, the risk as it pertains to just injury or just getting lost, for example, those are things that aren't necessarily top of mind, but are very, very prevalent risks and things that you have to account for. If you were to just take a small, the wrong step, and this actually happened to us, Aaron. I actually ended up, what is it? Tea over kettle or whatever it is.
Devil's kettle.
Well, no, but actually, so yeah, it was close to that. And I remember before I knew, it happened in an instant, and I was upside down, looking up at Aaron.
Oh, you're kidding me?
Oh no, yeah, this happened in the space of 1 nanosecond, and I consider myself pretty well, I had planned for this, and I was keeping, sort of track of what I was doing, where my feet were going, but it's just, you hit one tiny little root, and the next thing you know, you could be upside down, right?
Oh, and was this near a cliff or?
Thankfully not.
Okay.
But that is in fact, a concern, because especially with the Superior Hiking Trail, which is the trail I did, Aaron and I did. There are parts that do bring you pretty close to a precipice. And if you take one false step, then if you're not paying attention, and there's temptation to not be paying attention because you're looking at these beautiful vistas, right?
Okay.
And so if you're not paying attention to what you're doing, and again, it could just be one tiny little root, and you could fall, and now you've got the weight of a backpack to contend with. And so while you and I might fall walking down the sidewalk, if we trip, you might risk a bruised knee or something like that. But when you've got a backpack that weighs 20-30 pounds, your center of gravity changes dramatically, and so your ability to recover from that is also hampered. And so before you know it, you could end up on either side of that cliff, right? And so so things like that, and even if it's not a nasty fall, if you twist your ankle, break your leg, or something, something worse, it's cell reception is something to consider, and you're not necessarily close to a road and or a town where help might be readily available. So now you got to contend with that.
Right. And so it sounded like, just from talking to Aaron, when he tried this for the first time, he didn't really know what he's getting himself into, or he kind of knew what he's getting himself into. But I mean, I've known Aaron for a while now. He's an exceptional guy, but he's just like a guy, and so he gets into this. I mean, can anybody do these through hike trips? I mean, do you have to be an Ironman who can do amazing feats, or can anybody do this?
Absolutely. No, you can.
My training last summer consisted of going to Costco and buying the biggest bag of rice I could find, putting it in a backpack, and walking wherever I could walk through my town here in Fort Collins.
Okay.
The only thing that was missing was the 10,000 routes that Eric just mentioned that I hadn't prepared for. So, as he was saying, on the second day of our hike, I did have a road rash on my forehead for the rest of the way, because I tripped over a route just looking up at what we were surrounded by, and you don't account for the 35 pounds on your back when you're trying to catch yourself.
Yeah. Right.
So your forehead hits the ground. But I think all the things that Eric is saying, I mean, I think there's really something also to doing it with the companion. It just adds so much to it, and it adds also that level of security, especially when you're going into it and you don't know for sure what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, about a caution there, though. It depends on who you hike with. I was lucky. I mean, Aaron was a great companion, but if it's a prolonged hike, just make sure you pick your companion. If you're going with your wife or significant other, that might test the relationship in ways that you weren't expecting.
And so, I'm going to ask Aaron, just mostly because, Eric, I know you do this more often. So, Aaron, you mentioned walking around your hometown, and with some weight in the pack. Like, leading up to the trip, how long did you do that?
Yeah, I spent about 2 months.
About 2 months.
About 2 months, and it was equally divided between just physically. That was the most difficult part. I mean, just walking, out on the street, you can walk a long way, but when you're carrying 30 or 35 pounds, everything that you're going to need to survive, your tent, your blankets, your change of clothes, your food, that's the part that really you got to kind of prepare for and get used to. And the other side of that is, in that time, I mean, I was getting updated spreadsheets, and you want to go with someone who has an MBA, I think, who can really, everything that went in and out of the spreadsheet, the bottom line was the pounds and ounces.
Okay.
So, I mean, so Eric did an incredible job of just really helping me to understand, you're going to decide, like, do I really need this or do I not? And that's something I think when we even past maybe experienced or less experienced through hikers, the inexperienced folks sometimes had more things that maybe they didn't need. And the folks like Eric were really great at knowing, okay, this is the thing at REI that I select, so that, I saved just 3 ounces here, but I'm going to need it somewhere else.
Oh, okay. And then what was the trail that you guys did?
Superior Hiking Trail, which is it's in Minnesota, and it overlooks the northeastern part of Minnesota and overlooks the Superior Lake, which is absolutely beautiful.
Oh, okay.
And I have a couple pictures and a couple graphics to share with you if you'd like.
That'd be fantastic. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's absolutely beautiful. It's 260 miles. The traditional through hike for that space is about 260 miles. Like I mentioned earlier, the PCT and the Continental Divide, those are up in the thousands, right? Close to 2,000 plus, 3,000 almost. So, there's a number of the Appalachian Trail as well. Number of trails across the country that go. Most of them go north, south, south, north, but there are a few that actually work their way east, west, or west, east.
Okay. And how many miles of that did you guys do?
Aaron, I think
well, together we did about 100, didn't we?
Yep, I think so. I got pretty shy. So Aaron joined me for, was it 2 weeks, Aaron? Or a week? No, it was a week.
Yeah.
And I continued for an additional week and a half after that, and I covered the majority of the 260. I think I was shy maybe 30 miles, so I need another 2 days, 2.5 days if you count your last day when you hike out and wait for somebody to come get you. which is key,
Yeah.
by the way.
That's an important aspect of it. And so, you know, if somebody sees this video and they're thinking like, hey, through hiking might be something I'm interested in, do they just go to REI? Do they watch Reese Witherspoon do it? I mean, like, what do they do?
Yeah, you know, I would encourage, I think first and foremost is some soul searching, right? Like, what is the reason for doing this? Whether you had experience or not. I mean, for me, and I won't speak for Aaron, but for me, it was just this desire to escape. And, you know, a point in my life, I think, you know, the half-life captures it perfectly, where I'm a point in my life where I've done a lot of things professionally and personally, and I just wanted that time and space and this measure of accomplishment. I just wanted to accomplish something. I wasn't ready to accomplish the Pacific Crest Trail or the Continental Divide or any of that, but I wanted something that was more manageable, but still was going to be a stretch. So I would encourage anybody to really go into it thinking about the reasons why they want to do it. This isolation and the physical and mental exertion, believe it or not, there is some mental exertion, as I mentioned earlier, which is sort of even just watching where you're walking and sort of having to deal with the unknowns. Those will try you and they will test you. And if you're not prepared for those things, or you don't have a real reason to want to pursue those things, then you know, you can probably get in there 3 days and then call it quits. And so if really what you want to do is have that accomplishment, then I would start by questioning why you're doing it. And then secondly, just do your research. You know, there's definitely trails probably in every single state in the nation that can span a sort of shorter version of a through hike. I would start there, especially for somebody who's doing it for the first time. There's an incredible number of videos out on YouTube that cover everything from equipment to actually, I mean, you can actually follow an individual as they go through their through hike, as they sort of video record their day-to-day or portions of it. I would encourage folks to also do that, to get a real sense for what that looks like.
Yeah.
And third would be to, based on some of that research, then to put some effort into exploring you know, the things you'll need for this as well, if from an equipment standpoint, and do your research and, you know, be committed to it to the point where, you know, it is a significant investment if it's the first time you do it, but if you plan on doing it later and, you know, continuing to do it, I think it becomes a worthwhile investment. So going to REI and just willy-nilly picking out the first tent is probably not advisable. Just do your research. You know, Aaron mentioned that weight considerations, ounces, we're talking ounces here, really do matter.
It turns out ounces, when you carry them for 5, 7, 10, 260 miles, it makes a difference. And, you know, Aaron, for your experience, I mean, obviously it was great to have Eric to mentor you through this and kind of help you feel prepared.
You're welcome.
You know, for you doing it for 100 miles in 1 week, you know, did you feel that you got similar things out of it, some bit of soul searching and just kind of that mental isolation and concentration and a feeling of accomplishment? Or was the 1 week more of just, hey, it was a nice time to go for walking in the woods?
Well, it was a nice time to reconnect with Eric. But it was, you know, for me, I'm a dad. I got a business I run, and part of it was just absolute quiet. You know, there were times when it was just, I would tell Eric, just, you know, thump, thump. I could hear his hiking poles, and that was it. And, you know, the moments that I'm going to remember most are those where, you know, I was kind of at the edge of exhaustion. It's Minnesota, it's summer, it's humid. And, you know, we've already put in 20 miles and we know where we're going to set up our tent, but we know we don't have enough water till tomorrow morning. And so we've got to put our things down and we've got to wander out together. And we've got to keep our ears open because we know on the little paper map that there is a water source, and it's up to us to then work together to figure out how to get down to it. Right. And so those are the things I remember, is just, you know, just the feeling of it, like exhilaration, like, okay, you know, we have full water bags and we have a tent site. What more could we ask for in the world? Right. And we're going to just now let, you know, kind of let our bodies just rest for, you know, 8 or 10 hours, and then we're back up and at it again tomorrow morning.
And did you feel that, you know, at least for me, I haven't done a ton of camping but a lot of times that first night the ground feels a little hard, and then the second night you're kind of used to it. And then,
Well,
next thing you know, you're so tired from walking, you probably just fell down.
That's key.
oh yeah. No, I can't speak for Eric. I usually slept like a baby, but Eric,
I could hear him.
We'd set up our tents. Now Eric would have his tent up, and I mean, it looked like he'd have like an out room and an in room, and he'd have it all set up, and he'd be in there comfortable, soaking his feet or doing whatnot. And he's like, an hour later, he's like, Aaron, are you opening Christmas presents in there? I'm still rustling. I'm rustling around. I'm like, where did I leave that bug spray? Where's my water bottle? So I got better, but it was part of the process. A little bit better every time we set up.
That's great. And did you have to have like food drops mailed to certain outposts to pick up along the way?
Yeah, that's part of the planning, and that's perhaps the most important component of it. You really don't get an appreciation for survival, survival mode. Like, we watch all these shows on TV about some guy getting dropped off in the middle of Alaska with nothing, right? And it's not too dissimilar from that. I mean, you have to plan in advance. And so, thankfully, this trail, we started north to south. So to get to our starting point, you had to sort of maneuver your way through most of the trail. So we were able to drop off our care packages, if you will, for ourselves. They, as we were heading up there, and so they would be waiting for us days in advance. There's hotels and post offices and restaurants, even or even some retailers who will accept those free of charge and just hold them for you with sort of the understanding that after about a week's time they're free to just chuck them, right? They won't hold them indefinitely, but you can kind of work your way down and kind of hit those spots. So that's part of the planning, and part of it, a part of pivoting to your plan too, is if you expected. I mean, this happened to us, right? Looking at a map. This is another thing that I would add in terms of preparation. If and when you select a trail, just do your research on the trail, because of course on a map it all flat. Right. And you're thinking, okay, well, I can do 15 to 20 miles. No problem. I'll pace myself for that. That's about 8 hours of hiking. What really catches up with you, especially at the beginning, as your body begins to condition itself, is the altitude and the change in that. Right. And so 20 miles flat is not the same as 20 miles going up and down. And so we had to adjust our time and sort of our schedule based on how exhausted we felt and where we were, and again also the spacing of the campsites. And so making for provisions for that, carrying an extra day's worth of food is incredibly important, because you just never know what's going to happen, right?
Yeah. And did you feel when you came out of this at the conclusion of it, did you feel you were in the best shape that you've ever been in?
Oh, absolutely. Oh my God. I can't even tell you. I mean, my
metabolism
was amped.
Is that because you couldn't pack like potato chips and other things, and so you're eating healthy, or was it just the actual, exercise that you had every day combined with that food?
For me, it was just the metabolism in my body. I couldn't consume enough food. In fact, I think our food was pretty healthy, Aaron. But I did indulge in the occasional. Every day actually was my daily treat. It was a Snickers bar, and that's it's also it's well known as a thru-hiker's treat. Really is a Snickers bar. It's like the unknown but heavily supported, I guess, treat of any trail. They should sponsor Thru-Hikes.
So, I mean, it sounds like that if somebody's going to think about this, because I'm a little intimidated hearing about it. I mean, it sounds pretty intense, but it seems that this might be a goal somebody sets, that this could be a bucket list item. For, I don't know, some people believe in bucket lists, some people don't, but this seems like an item that you could put out a year, 2, 5 years, whatever, in advance, and then kind of work up to it, knowing that, hey, one time I'd like to do this through hike, so let me start hiking a little bit more of the regional hikes. Let me start carrying a pack. Let me actually go camp in the woods a couple nights. I mean, I think it would be a little scary when you're out there in the woods and you're 10, 15, 20 plus miles from anybody, and you set up your tent and you hear something in the woods. I'm assuming you're not traveling with a big bear gun. Like, do you have, mace?
Actually,
pepper spray? Like,
actually, I was ridiculed for my pepper spray. That was one of the signs that I didn't know what I was doing. And as we crossed with some experienced hikers, they were telling us like, yeah, I dumped mine like 30 miles back. It was just too much weight. It was an extra 6 ounces. I haven't seen a bear, and it was 6 ounces, so it had to go. Yeah. So, and Eric kept telling me, the bears want less of us than what we do with them anyway, which is, probably true.
Well,
yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. This is the beauty of Zoom calls. No, I would say, you were talking earlier about weight, right? Like, so ounces lead to pounds, pounds lead to pain. And I kept saying that to Aaron. I said, you got to shave as many ounces here and there because they do add up. But I think he showed up with, I don't know how many bags of wet ones and, the bear spray. I think you had a horn. Didn't you? Had a horn. You had a horn. You had an air
I had a horn. Yeah.
You had an air horn. So I think all those things combined right there is probably 2 pounds, 2.5 pounds. And I know that doesn't sound like much, but when you consider that your daily food, or maybe 3 days worth of food is probably about 5 pounds. Now looking at 7, right? And that's your variable weight. And then your base weight is everything else that you carry, your tent, your sleeping bag, and all these things. And those could add up anywhere from 15 to 20 pounds. So you're already looking at 30. I think, Aaron, you were at 30 to 35 pounds, I think.
Yeah, I was close to 35. And like by like 3 or 4 in the afternoon, we're sitting down for a snack, and I'm like, what's the heaviest food item in my bag?
And so after having done this, is there one product that stands out to be the greatest product that you brought with you, like a water filter or something like that? Was there one thing that just stood out as like, this is the essential product you have to have?
Yeah, Aaron, I don't know. I mean, your bullhorn probably was the least used.
That would make the list. I would say, well, I had never been in a situation where I had to think about running out of water. That was a new situation. And once you get low on water and you're out in the middle of the woods, like that doesn't leave the back of your mind. Like you're always then after that point, you're always kind of calculating like how thirsty am I and how much water do I have? So I'd say those, what was it called? A Sawyer squeeze bag that we used, Eric?
Yep.
Which, to be able to filter the water out of the creek, that was probably the most useful, I would say, aside from, Eric directed me on getting instead of hiking boots, which I would have bought, he had directed me to a really great pair of trail running shoes that ended up being really great in terms of traction. So I would say that would be 1 and 2 for me.
Oh, interesting. And so you actually went with like instead of like what I think of the classic hiking boot, given the terrain and everything, you were able to go with the trail running shoe?
Yeah, the trail runners are actually the preferred. And again, this came from research. I prior to doing a through hike, I had my hiking boots and I would have otherwise relied on them. But just doing the research, I mean, if you're putting in 20 miles a day for a continuous number of days, I mean, the wear and tear on your feet is critical. I mean, taking care of your feet is one of the top priorities for any through hiker. It's just if your feet if you have blisters or if you twist your ankle or any of that, you're just not going to be able to make up those miles, and then you miss your schedule. You run out of food. You're away from a city or town where you can exit. So it's critical that you stay on track, and it's critical that you take care of your feet. I would say, your shelter if we're talking about the things that are absolutely critical, right? So shelter, you absolutely need shelter. I mean, there was one night, Aaron, where, despite it being humid and being sort of the latter end of a Minnesota summer, it dipped down to 30, 32 or something. I mean, we were freezing. So shelter and the appropriate sleeping accoutrements, if you will. I would argue, well, actually, speaking of sleeping, I mean, you need a good pad. You need to get your rest. Like, you never realize how restorative good sleep is until you're actually at a point where it's absolutely essential for you to get it right and sleep through the night. Food, and then feet care. would be the things, and then water. I think those would be my 5 essentials. The rest of that, the bullhorn, some of these others, the Snickers bars, and some of these things are nice to have, but they're not essential.
Eric could do an amazing video on the food. I was blown away at what he had for us each evening that we rehydrated at the campfire. It was just amazing.
Yeah.
Food's important.
Yeah. Well, I think that the thing that's interesting about this, and I think is attractive, probably what drew you to it, and what I find kind of pulling me a little bit, is there's so few opportunities that you have in life to actually see, what the limits are. And that doesn't mean that you're going further than you need to go and you're being unsafe. But like what you mentioned in terms of water, like having to actually think, like, where am I going to get my water? How am I going to ration it? There's an opportunity. There might not be water for me tomorrow. And so you have to plan and think about that. I personally, in my lifetime, I've never had that issue. I've always had the water's right next door, right? And it's always close. So I think that's an interesting aspect that I would imagine just allows you to feel a little bit closer to nature and kind of feel almost a little bit more kind of primal, kind of
vulnerable, really, is the word that I would use. I mean, and that was actually what drew me to it. I mean, there is this inherent risk, as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, is the risk of running out of food, the risk of running out of water, the risk of falling and hurting yourself. And I think just makes you vulnerable, right? And in that vulnerability is where you can explore the things that you want to explore that set you out on this path to begin with, right? So you get down to you strip away all the distractions and even the conveniences, having water right out of the tap, and once you cover your basic moments and your basic your essentials, then at this point, then you can start really providing the headspace to explore other things and the real reasons you're out there.
Yeah. One of the neat things I noticed, Tim, after about 2 days, is that even though we were in this canopy, I could start to tell the difference between the sound of the wind and the sound of water.
Very true.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. It's just your senses become more acute because everything else is tuned out. Yeah,
that's fantastic. And what's next? Like, was this the first? I mean, I think for Eric, I think it's the first of several. Well, I don't know if it was the first. It's probably not the first, but at least the start of doing this multiple times. Aaron, maybe you're going back again. Like, what does the future look like for you guys for through hiking?
Yeah, no, I would definitely do it again. And I just, having been through it, one time, and you kind of realize that, kind of come what may, you get through it. And we had a couple experiences that, we started off in such a remote area that the trail wasn't trodden. It was barely discernible, and the trees were barely marked. And Eric and I, after walking with great enthusiasm our first day, 10 miles into nowhere, realized that we were off the trail.
Oh, no.
And and didn't have a marker. And, you start to, have that anxiety, like, oh boy, like what do we do? And it was a really amazing, I mean, where else do you and your partner kind of get to try to calm each other down and to think things through and to plan things out? And eventually we, one would stay and the other would venture out looking for signs of a trail. And eventually we backtracked and realized that in trying not to step in the creek, we missed the marker, which was above us. So we missed the turn. So things like that. And, the second day it was one of those, it poured from the minute we packed up camp. I mean, it was, the socks were sopping. And that's what we had to walk in for the next 18 miles. And, that's a day I'll never forget because, if I was on my own, like, I don't know I probably would have pulled out my Garmin and called for a pickup. And, it was just awesome. Like we just kept each other's heads in the right place and encouraged each other and ended up, getting where we needed to go. And so just unforgettable. I definitely will do it again.
Yeah, same. Actually, I found myself wishing to have that opportunity, especially with everything that's happened in the recent weeks and months across the nation and across the world, really. And it's just that desire to just be out there because it just does provide you that escape. And and self-reliance. And I think those things, if that's what you're after, that's the way to get it.
Yeah. Well, this has been super interesting. What I thought would happen, I think has happened. I want to do this. I don't know how soon. I don't know exactly when it's going to happen, but it's definitely on my list. Are there any other final thoughts that you'd put out there for people who see this that are not currently through hikers? So I think if you're currently through hikers, you're probably not going to see this video. But if you've never done it before, this is what you're going to see. Is there any other thoughts that you might put out there?
You know, I would just say this. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? You know, certainly you can get eaten by a bear. I guess is probably the worst thing that can happen. But realistically, you know, you can always pull the ripcord on something like this. You can set out with the best intentions, and if it's not your jam, or you find out that you're not feeling comfortable, or find yourself unprepared, there's always a way out, right? And especially if you plan ahead, there's always a way out. And that's what I kept telling myself. It's like, what's the worst that can happen? What do I have to lose if I go? And what I compare that to what I had to lose if I didn't. And not doing it significantly, for me personally, outweighed the risk and the fear of doing it. I mean, I've done a lot of camping and hiking in my past, and I was a little apprehensive the night before, especially carrying some dead weight in Aaron. But but no, you know, I was actually excited to be going with someone, because I think that made the adventure all the better, and made it just easier to think I'm not facing this alone, right? But I would just say, like, what's the worst that can happen? Right?
Yeah. Aaron, anything?
And I think, yeah, no, I think it's again, it's one of those rare experiences where you can be in your ordinary life, and 24 hours later, you can just be in a different universe. There's very few things where, you know, you're just removed and planted in a completely different place, and not just physically, but in terms of your mind. So you know, it's something that even as I'm back here and living my normal life, I sit at my desk and think about on a nice day. So, you know, it kind of calls you back. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Aaron and Eric, thank you so much for sharing your experience. Hopefully a few people will get inspired, and they'll take this on and they'll do it. I'll make the commitment in terms of people who decide to do that. Leave some messages down below in the comments, and we'll get back to them. Not necessarily Eric and Aaron, but maybe they will. But I certainly will get back to them and do some research, any questions that they have. Thank you guys so much for your time. Such a fun conversation. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now, and we'll get to you in 1 second here.